I'm Becky. I'm a senior researcher at LHB, and I'll be the moderator for this session. I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of AIA Minnesota to day 3 of the AIA Minnesota Conference. We are presenting to you today on Demystifying B3 for small projects. We've got a great panel of speakers here who are excited to talk to you about how integrating the state's sustainable building guidelines into small projects can help improve sustainability outcomes. This program has been approved for 1.25 credits, with that is health, safety, and welfare specific, and pending approval will also be providing GBCI grants. We'd like to thank USGBC for their support of this session. USGBC Minnesota is proud to partner with AIA Minnesota to deliver content that supports a more sustainable, healthy, resilient, and equitable future for all. As I'm sure you've heard by now in previous sessions, attendance verification can be done either online or through paper copies found in the registration area. You don't need to do both, just one or the other. And then finally, please do turn off or silence your cell phones so that everybody can focus on the content period. With that, I'd love to introduce our speakers and our outline for this session. As I mentioned, I'm Becky Alexander with LHB. I've been on the management team for the state of Minnesota's B3 and SB 2030 programs for about a decade now, where I assist in guideline development, communications and training, and management of the online B3 case studies database. I'll be giving just a really quick overview of the B3 and SB 2030 programs, and then I'll turn it over to our panelists. Our first speaker will be Sausen, a principal and leader of sustainability efforts at Alliance. Amber has over a dozen years of experience working on projects that have used the Minnesota's B3 guidelines, and today she'll be sharing reasons why she gets excited when she sees that B3 will be part of the project's requirements. Next, we have Patrick Smith, a research fellow at the Center for Sustainable Building Research at the University of Minnesota. Pat leads the development and implementation of the B3 guidelines and SB 2030 programs, and today, he'll be walking us through how these programs have been adapted for use by small projects. Our final speaker is Jennifer Garman, who leads the regenerative design initiatives of Cunningham's Grove Studio. Jen will be sharing her experience using the B3 guidelines small buildings method for a case study at the Wakan Tipi Center. I have a few questions for our panel that can get us rolling into a panel discussion, but we of course would love to hear your questions as well, so we'll be saving some time for that at the end. Okay, before we dig into the content, just wanted to get a sense of who's in the room. Will you please raise your hand if you have ever worked on a B3 guidelines project? This is a good sign. Okay, anybody who's never heard of B3, maybe you just need those GBCI credits? No shame. Okay, that makes our job a little bit easier here. How about people who work on projects that are less than 20,000 square feet? Nice. Be honest here, is anybody planning to sneak out early to catch that ethics session? Okay, we'll try to have our Q&A time both of that. We'll see. Okay, so that helpful context. We're trying to, in this presentation, communicate the details around the pathways that were recently created for small projects that are using the B3 guidelines and SB 2030 energy standard. But we've also attempted to make this presentation relevant for any small project, even if it's not required to use the B3 guidelines, thinking about which sustainability strategies are really high value for these types of small projects. To that end, I'll also note that any project team can access the B3 guideline language along with guidance for meeting the guidelines and tools and calculators on the website. So if you hear us mention a topic that you'd like to explore in more detail, even if you don't have a B3 project, you can go to that b3mn.org website to learn more. Okay, so let's dig in with a quick overview of the B3 and SB 2030 programs. These programs and tools support sustainable buildings throughout their life cycle. They establish project-specific performance requirements during the pre-design phase design strategies to meet these goals during design and construction, and require tracking actual performance during operations. The B3 guidelines are a holistic set of sustainable building guidelines that are used from that pre-design phase all the way through operations. They address issues related to performance management, site and water, energy and atmosphere, indoor environmental quality, and materials and waste. It's made up of a mix of prescriptive and performance-based requirements, and while there are some optional guidelines, it differs from other systems like LEED or WELL in that most of the guidelines are just required for any project that has relevant project scope, rather than having kind of a small menu of prerequisites accompanied by a much larger menu of optional credits like LEED or WELL would have. Projects that receive certain types of funding from the state are required to comply with these guidelines, and there are over 300 projects that are registered to use them. If you are working on a project that has any sort of public funding and you haven't asked yet, or it hasn't been made clear whether the B3 guidelines SB 2030 is required for that project, please do ask. We see that in some cases design teams are being notified of this requirement a little bit late in the design process, and it's hard to catch up. SB 2030 is a part of the energy and atmosphere section of the B3 guidelines. It's a progressive building energy and carbon reduction program that is modeled on the Architecture 2030 program. So that stepped approach to achieving net zero energy and carbon buildings by 2030. So today, a new construction or renovation project that's being designed needs to be using 80% less carbon-producing energy for operations than the average building in existence in 2003. So with that overview, I'd like to turn it over to Amber, who we have been affectionately calling a B3 ambassador, to get you pumped about using the sustainability guidelines.
Okay, wow, that's maybe a high bar, but we'll try. All right, so why do I find B3 so exciting on projects? I think first of all, I want to level set for all of us as we look at B3, as we talk about LEED, as we start to talk about International Living Futures Institute and the Living Building Challenge, green globes. There's a lot of different green rating systems out there. So let's level set on what makes a good rating system. So first of all, it needs to be science-based. Like we're not, willy-nilly saying, oh, that makes me feel good about green buildings. No. It's got to be reproducible by others. It's got to be transparent. Can you access all the information that goes into making that green building system and how it's evaluating projects? It's objective. That sounds great. Okay. Progressive. Are these standards pushing us to move beyond business as usual? And B3 is doing all of those. And they have been very transparent and very open about how they are creating, evaluating, and refining guidelines along the way. But in addition, B3 is regional. I really appreciate that about B3, that it is developed to really focus on the key environmental challenges we face right here in our beautiful state of Minnesota. Okay, so if you need to close your eyes if you don't want to see anybody else's answers to this question. How many of you, raising your hands, feel a little stressed and a little anxious once you see that B3 tracking tool? Yeah, I get it. There's a lot of information in here. But I get really actually excited when I see this because I know it's not going to be business as usual. We are going to be doing projects that are good for people. B3 projects create great places to work, to research, to study, to do good things that advance knowledge and expertise for people working in these buildings here in our state. They're also good for people in the fact that they are uniquely Whether they're educational, whether they're industrial, B3 covers the whole gamut of project types out there. So ensuring that we're using healthy materials, that we're employing HVAC systems that support good indoor air quality for all of those users and occupants. I'm looking at this engine repair lab. If we're not taking care of those students through creating exquisite indoor air quality, how do we expect them to get a good education to further economic development throughout our state through those skills that they're building and bringing out into the profession? Another aspect of B3 that I find really exciting, and I personally would say I still need more education on it, so don't feel bad if you find these guidelines a little overwhelming, but that's acoustics. The fact that B3 really pushes us to create great acoustical environments to support health and mental well-being as well as safety is, I think, a really admirable portion of the B3 guidelines. But B3 is not just good for people, it's also good for non-people. So the site and water guidelines within B3 are wonderful tools to help us create spaces that restore and protect habitat for endangered species, protecting birds against window strikes through use of bird-safe glazing and design that eliminates traps and clear corners, and the creation of beautiful outdoor spaces that support pollinator health and wildlife health. These guidelines don't inhibit creative, beautiful design expression, but rather they really help us channel it in ways that are high impact. And speaking of high impact, B3 is, wow, good for operations. The energy savings goals within B3 lead to real and meaningful results. And that means that your clients and owners are saving money in the long term through lower operating costs due to the energy, lighting, and HVAC efficiency measures that your design team will employ, that all of you will employ to meet that SB 2030 energy standard. And an aspect of the energy guidelines that I really appreciate is the need to evaluate for renewable energy. So these guidelines are really helpful in confirming or dispelling the notion that renewable energy is just too expensive. It might not be, and you won't know that until you take a look at it, and the guidelines will help you do a really clear evaluation of that. B3 is also aspirational. Remember going back to what makes a good green buildings rating system? It's progressive. B3 is definitely progressive. It is aspirational. It helps us push ourselves to enhance our practice. You don't lose time picking and choosing guidelines to meet. Let's meet them all. And so the faith that has been placed in us and the trust placed in us that we can do it all is really special. That sort of empowerment from our state and through the CSBR and B3 program, I find that super inspiring. Like, yeah, we can rise to that challenge. And most importantly, I think B3 is accessible. We literally have someone who's writing these guidelines right here at the table with us. This program was developed by and for Minnesota. When you run into a question or facing a unique project challenge, you can pick up the phone, you can send an email, the email address is right up there. And someone, a real person, is going to get back to you and tell you how we can do this together and work through this challenge to make high-performance projects. So I'm excited to hand it off to Pastor from CSBR to walk us through this small building method.
Hello. Yes, I'll get a little more in the weeds than yeah, as mentioned, Pat Smith, the Senior Research Fellow at the CSBR at the University of Minnesota. I'll start with just a note. If you have a project coming through B3, please reach out and get in touch with us. I'm typically the first point of contact for project teams, so please keep me in mind if you have a project you know has to do B3 or SB 2030, or if you have a project that may need to meet B3 or SB 2030. And Becky mentioned that you have public funding to verify or check on what the funders require for building programs. B3 worked recently for municipal funded projects. SB 2030 may apply. Also be conscious that if folks are pursuing funding but not yet funded, that still may be implemented. So just as a heads up, that's projects that may or may be pursuing. All right, that other one. What I'll talk about is when we did a revision to the guidelines relating to small buildings, what our purpose for this was, what our timeline for this was, and what conditions for applicability we had for small projects. And I'll also talk about how this rolled out across the B3 guidelines and also how we're looking to address this for smaller sites as well. And I'll also talk about how under SB 2030, small buildings are treated. So why did we take a pass through our guidelines to revise them for smaller buildings? These smaller projects are coming through with a smaller budget, you've got a smaller project team, you've got a more truncated, quicker design and construction schedule, and you have a potentially different scale of impact to the guidelines that we're asking for. So we're really looking at the relationship between the design and construction effort and the effort that's required to do the B3 guidelines. This is broken down into a couple of different parts, this set of revisions. The SB 2030 small buildings method has been around for a while. There's been now 3 versions of that, starting first in 2011, when it was resubmitted in 2020. Small sites approach, looking at how those updates across the site water section of the guidelines, and looking at specifically what size disturbance you have on your project sites. We had some elements of this that came in with version 3.1 in 2019. Other parts of this will be released in likely at this point early 2023 as the second revision of version 3.2 of the guidelines. Just as to take a step back, we've got several versions of the guidelines that are out there right now. We're currently on version 3.2. We had a set of provisions for the small buildings method that we applied to that version 3.2. We're labeling that 3.2 revision 1 or RO1, and those were implemented last year, 2021. For those small building method updates, those are the majority of what I'll be discussing today. We looked at everything but site, essentially, but what the current exterior is looking. So building scale and building scope related guidelines. Applicability. So what do we call a small building? What do we consider a small building to be? The threshold that we landed on was a gross conditioned square footage of 20,000 square feet. We picked that because it aligned with some EDA program, it aligned with ASHRAE, all the design guides, and based on analysis of our portfolio of buildings, that seemed to be a reasonable spot to mark the difference between a smaller building and a larger building. I will note, though, that we have this 20,000 square foot threshold for small buildings versus larger buildings, but there's some distinctions for what they count as a small building under SB 2030, the energy-related portion of the guidelines, the overall guideline effort, and what we consider to be a small building for B3 guidelines. There's a helpful table. I'm always happy to make a table for something about what guidelines or what types of spaces are considered under each program. Most buildings that have conditioned occupied space, that's just the number that you have, right? You have a certain size building that occupants are in that you're engaged with. The boundary conditions are if you have spaces that are conditioned with primarily inactive storage. That if you're heating that space, if you're cooling that space, you'll need to consider it for SB 2030 because it's related to the energy use of the building, but it's not related to essentially an occupant engaged space, and so we exclude it from consideration for the B3 guidelines program. So if you have, let's say, an office in a large heated warehouse, the occupant in the heated warehouse is primarily inactive, you don't have maintenance space, you're not doing stuff in that large part of the building, then we would just be counting that regularly occupied office space and not inactive storage area. And then if you do have questions about spaces that would be considered as part of this or excluded as part of this, please reach out and let us know. We'll get a table from the to say here's the spaces that we have in our project requirements, which of these would we consider to be, which part of this table. We're happy to review that. Capability for small sites is a little bit different because we wanted to add some nuance to projects that may have a large building on a small amount of exterior area outside the project footprint, or a small building on a large amount of exterior area. So we're looking at land disturbance based on square footage in cubic yards. One thing we also noted was we're smoothing now for contributing square footage of disturbed area, those disturbances related to AIA and utility connections. We had a situation where you had a project that was essentially doing no site work, if not for doing some small AIA upgrades and doing some utility hookups or upgrading to your electrical point. We want to be accommodating with that, not through the project scope. I will note, and I don't think I've got this in the slide, noted that just as a general comment, if you have a project that is limited in its scope, if you have a project that is coming in, let's say, with an interior-only renovation, we have the applicability related to the small buildings method. There's also scope determination that we can use for a project where you would drop out guidelines that are unrelated to the work that you're doing in a project. This is not to say that the threshold will need to be met if you are engaging in certain areas of project, but we're not going to require there to be a site update for an interior renovation. That's not what you're coming in with the project. So just as a level setting. Our view is that we can engage with the scope of the projects that come through. We don't typically step outside that to grow the project scope. All right, so small buildings method, again, we're just carving this out into buildings and sites and SP23. So the goal for this was to just decrease the cost administration for smaller projects, to look and focus in on topics with a high impact to burden ratios. What are those things that can be quickly addressed that can be really represent better buildings, and then retain as many environmental and health benefits as possible. When we went through this, the rubric that was used, essentially the direction, the vector that we wanted to go in was, does that guideline result in a meaningful change in design construction compared to business as usual? So as I mentioned, this guideline set is intended to bump up typical practice, right? We're nudging projects towards building better buildings and doing better for their occupants. Another piece was how much effort is required for compliance, how expensive it is to achieve compliance. Are we needing to engage with, for a small team, engage with consultants and other folks that may grow that team and grow that cost? And is it appropriate for small projects? Would the strategies that are typically applied to one guideline area be reasonable for a smaller project to pursue? So this is the overall, in this effort, this is the overall where we live. The darkest gray here is darkest gray here are those that are required, or not required, so those are the ones that dropped out for smaller projects. The largest piece of the small buildings update was to waive the guideline requirements in certain guideline areas for smaller buildings. The next, down here, that's the ones that had modified guidelines, so those are the ones that performance threshold would be, maybe you're looking at smaller amount of materials that you're required to evaluate, but we're looking at some minimization of effort there, and then the ones that are required as is, and those are the high impact ones that were reasonable to keep in place. Is that rightmost bar? I will note for the ones that were retained as is, in some of the guidelines themselves, there are certain thresholds for requirements that, although they may be retained as is, there still may be nuance to whether they're applicable for smaller projects. We have, for example, requirements relating to refrigerant selection, pointing to the Significant New Alternatives Program at the EPA to pick the refrigerants that are going into your projects. If you don't have, some of those guidelines are not applicable if you don't have large equipment with large amounts of refrigerant charge. And so there, even the guidelines that are still required as is, really digging into those and saying, okay, well, that may be required, but in that guideline specifically, do I have equipment that's going to trigger this? So there is nuance in terms of what the requirements is. I'm just going to go briefly through what's required for small projects to give an overview about what the guidelines look like. And these are by the sections that are sorted in the guidelines themselves. So we start with performance management. We've got an order project requirement, basis of design, and a safety risk assessment for buildings that are occupied while they're under construction. Commissioning is required for HVAC systems and lighting controls. This is a shorter list, HVAC systems and lighting controls, than it would be for a larger project. There's a larger commissioning requirement for larger projects. IAQ management plan for construction and IAQ testing of occupancy needed, and then post-occupancy evaluation, but only if you've got a lot of occupancy in your building. And this is a process that's supported by our team, and we get through a few of these every year. This is one that's really on us to work through if you do have a post-occupancy evaluation. For site water, for the small building projects, this is, right, I'll get to what the applicability thresholds are. Yes. Overall site water requirements, we have worked over our updates several times to figure out where to put the different site water sections. Currently, they're set up with S1 to S5, one used to have S1 to S4, the number of requirements. But you're looking at how does your project connect to to things around it? How does your project connect to human networks, plant networks, animal networks? How does it support potentially vegetated areas or rare natural areas that are present in where you're driving your site? In terms of building water use, we're asking for a 50% reduction in building water use. For vegetation, the site selected shouldn't be a critical site. We've got requirements related to tree condition, because we see tree condition as an area where they're not only providing adequate rootable soil volumes and other elements that we need to support that tree health. Pollinator support for requests from the legislature, and then soil and albedo units. We also have animal habitat support and bird safety. So this is looking at how can our sites do better to support Minnesota's animal populations. In particular, we have a portion of the guidelines related to bird safety. Specifically related to bird safety, there is a significantly streamlined approach for small buildings that don't include threat factors, that don't include high-risk areas. So essentially, if you don't have an area where a skyway that birds are able to fly through, then you can take a window-to-wall ratio and basically how much strip you have in place in calculation and use that to confirm that you are not a high-risk building for birds. And that's for also sites that are on like critical requirements. For energy atmosphere, I'll talk about SB 2030 in a minute. But overall, the energy atmosphere section of the 3 guidelines is you need SB 2030. You're documenting your energy consumption, so how much energy is your building designed to use, how much energy is your project using in operation. We have a requirement for on-site renewables, and there's a little bit of there's 2 spots that they require renewables to be 3 guidelines. One is the 2% requirement that has been around for a long period of time. There's a specific test that you evaluate to see if this requirement applies. There also may be a larger amount of renewables needed if you need them to meet your SB 2030 target. So just keep in mind, you've got a project coming through here, there's a 2% requirement, and there's a potentially larger piece that comes in with the SB 2030 program. We also require projects to be renewable ready, because even if you do that exercise, it doesn't come back as cost effective today, you still want to be perhaps solar ready in the future. We have requirements for Energy Star appliances. This is one thing you're respecting, making sure that those are required. I talked about refrigerant selection, I think mentioned already. And then EV infrastructure. This EV infrastructure is another area where it's still present for small buildings, but if you're not putting parking into your building, it's not one that we're going to come in and make you add a bunch of parking spots to modify your parking. But if you are doing parking, you should note that you have to make that EV ready. And EV ready is just running the conduit, making sure that people have adequate space to lay out those charging points in the future. Indoor environmental quality. This widowed down to looking at all of the interior materials in the projects, to looking at the top 5 by surface area. We still retain VOC limits for wet applied and chemical restrictions for wet applied materials, because those are the ones that have an outside impact on your installers and on your occupants. Bulk water management, moisture safe construction are both still required. Ventilation rates need to be input and evaluated. Filtration is still present. That's, I think, even since we wrote this updated guidelines, the board is known about how valuable it is to have those higher power rating filters in your system, so that you are keeping that high level of air quality and potentially dropping out things like particulate that could spread disease. Soil gas control is still present, though we've looked really narrowly at this in terms of what part of the building do you have that is either conditioned or sealed off. So if you have like a parking garage, for example, we're not going to do a soil gas plug below a large parking deck, with the open downside there. But if you have a smaller area that is occupied within that would be one to focus in for that soil gas control. And then passive thermal filters, making sure you don't have areas in the building where you have where you're likely to get unwanted heat gains. Continuing with indoor environmental quality, one piece that got added to this for daylight specifically was for smaller projects to do some modeling on our end so that we could give design teams window-to-wall ratios to work with that would be expected to meet our daylight requirements, to step away from making the design teams do the daylighting modeling themselves. And so, similar to bird safety, we're looking at what is how can we approach this from a window-to-wall restriction requirement, then making folks do the modeling themselves. I will also, as a general note, state that if you want to use the full building version of any of these guidelines, if you want to push on, if you want to do your daylight modeling, if you want to do all the different bird safety requirements, those are still paths that are available for small buildings. But note that these are the streamlined versions that are approved for projects that are under 20,000 square feet. So if you see this and you think, oh, actually, I don't want to do the daylight model, and I think I can make sure that I can metrics with that, or I want to do it with top lighting and not with side lighting, yeah, feel free to have at it. That is an option for you, as well as the streamlined approaches. Acoustic requirements are still present. One note on acoustics, this is the area that when we do literature review of, and when we look at our own post-occupancy evaluation work, is still an area where the occupant comfort is driven in large part by the conditions in a way that I think is not always captured in design efforts. And so this is one area, if you open up a B3 project and ask why are they asking so much from the acoustic side of things, it's because we're hearing back from folks through our survey mechanisms and through literature in the indoor environmental quality field that acoustics is this huge driver for occupant comfort and productivity and well-being. Similar to daylight, but I think a little bit less apparent than daylight. Access to vision glazing and some kind of human comfort elements, so adjustable workstation and chairs, universal design principles, and a quiet use or lactation room. Which do note that for smaller projects, this has come in and not been surprising for folks. I think a lot of designers know why that's a very valuable thing to include, but has had to redo a few projects that have come through recently, redo their small building layout to make sure that they have a space they can consider for that. So just a heads up for that, you will need to have some quiet use or lactation for meeting projects. Materials and waste, this is the last section of the guidelines. An embodied carbon reduction is still present, although we permit this to be done with essentially billing of materials. So if you've identified that you're selecting low impact materials for basically the large areas of the buildings and structural systems, the cladding, insulation, then we can consider that you've achieved a carbon reduction if you're not using a bunch of concrete and a bunch of SPs, essentially. So if you've already whittled down and you're using lower impact systems, that's a path to noting a lower carbon building. We have a essentially bundled environmentally conformable materials guideline, but we're only requiring that for the top 5 materials. So similar to low VOC requirements, We are just looking at the largest number of, or the most prevalent by weight or by cost. Construction waste reduction is still present, and this is just one to make sure that you have identified every column that you can do that's reduction, which can be non-attributable for some folks. And then mercury limits and compact fluorescent lamps is one of those legacy guidelines that's still present in our program, just in case you have some odd use case that you have fluorescent lamp in, or taking in mercury reduction for that, but most projects not going to see a fluorescent lamp in there, so you can worry about it. Some adjustments, and I just want to flag the areas that saw some burn reduction. Commissioning, again, got scaled back from a larger list of requirements, such as HVAC and lighting systems. And then no energy efficient operation manual is required. So this is the effort that you've worked with us to put forward basically a check on all your lighting systems in operations. That's one that fell out of this set of documents. So most site water guidelines, and again, we've kind of bundled together the site water and the building guidelines. Most guidelines are required for sites that are less than 1,000 square foot. Those stormwater requirements are for sites less than 5,000 square feet. Those soil requirements are for that threshold as well. Any site less than an acre, this is the shift, would need to have a habitat supportive water feature. And then burn safety guideline calculations are simplified for these buildings. And again, it goes to a window to wall ratio based evaluation. Under energy and atmosphere, and I'll talk about SB 2030 in a second here. Prescriptive options present for SB 2030, which doesn't require energy modeling. And then no sub-meter requirements beyond what's required, apart from secondary metering, the projects are larger campus. So by sub-metering, it's going to be a couple different things to different people. When we say sub-metering, it needs to be separated from larger campus. If you have like a single building on a Minnesota State campus, it needs to have metering that separates it from the larger campus. But if it's a smaller project, apart from that metering separation from the larger campus, would not need to be further metered than that. Indoor environmental quality, looking into the top 5 materials. Enclosure, moisture analysis does not need to be pursued, although we don't think it's a good idea. And we have a laser calculator posted on our website that can be really useful to figure out if your buildings are potentially have moisture columns, walls, or roofs. Again, the daylight levels can be done with window-to-wall ratio calculations. And acoustic calculations, again, still present. This is still a large area of influence in terms of indoor occupant comfort, but it is significantly simplified. For materials and waste, we don't require the whole building LCA model. Again, you can do this by telling it to take the building out of. We don't require EPDs or product chemical inventories to be done in these smaller projects. Environmentally, for the materials, again, it goes back to the large number, back down to just the top 5. And then there was documentation effort for material conservation and waste management plans needed for larger projects, which is not there for smaller projects. All right, so let's go back to how about focus on the SB 2030 small buildings method. I'm going to speed up just a little bit because I think I'm running a little bit late. Getting a lot of dots. Okay, SB 2030 small building methods. Again, there's been a version of this around for now 11 years. Our goal here is to increase cost administration for small projects and provide projects with a prescriptive path through the program rather than relying on a design method. SB 2030 review comes in during the design of the project, typically a little bit further into the design of the project, although if we can get in early and have an early level setting with the design team, that is preferable to us. We can do a design phase review and a final design review. That's ideal because we should get everything sorted out in the design phase and we can execute it in the final design phase. Small buildings, so just take a step back, overall in B3, 80% significant reduction from that 2003 baseline. Becky mentioned that is where we are in the program right now. To do that, we understand that there's different opportunities available for different projects and different project sites. And so the way the SB 2030 program works right now is project teams exhaust what's available to them on the project site. It still holds on to their SB 2030 target, looking off-site for different ways to meet that with renewable energy. And so you look at efficiency measures and on-site renewable measures first. Exhaust what's available for the project site there. Then look at what's available in the broader project portfolio. Some projects have portfolios to work within, other projects don't. But if that is present, that's expected to be the second step of the working towards SB 2030. If you can't do that, then you're looking at things like renewable energy certificates or green power procurement. So looking at basically market solutions for that last bit to make it all the way to the SB 2030 targets. Right, so this is really exhaust the site and step out from that once that site's been exhausted. This is scale jumping in the language of the future challenge. So how this looks for our project, shown here on the left, you've got the 2003 baseline. This is the 80% reduction in that, so this becomes your energy budget. If you were just to build a code, you'd be doing about double that. You can do measures, you'll get some measures better than code. That's your energy consumption. On-site renewables, those come into play. Lower that further, but they may not make it all the way there to your target. Anybody who's sized the net zero project understands what you're doing on the site relative to the available barrier, the available site area you have on the project. Those ratios look different for different building types and areas. And so then this is what you kind of projects offsite. So project teams working through this program, they first calculate their SB 2030 energy target. This is based on what you're doing in your building, what your program is. And then look at evaluate measures to in order to hit that target. And then offsite it. Small building methods really engage in these two elements of the program. So what efficiency measures you have available and what resulting energy use are you going to be achieving from those measures. For a larger project, the way this exercise works, the way that we can confirm the project team's exhaust what's available to them on the project site, is to ask them to evaluate things up to a cost-effective limit. We're currently using a 12-year simple payback. And then to achieve a equivalent energy use intensity of that 12-year payback building. That is a back and forth effort between our group, our review team at CEE, and the project team. For smaller projects, we wanted to open this up to a prescriptive path and say, okay, well, in order to get a reasonable set of efficiency reductions, we're going to look at next generation of codes as a prescriptive path for that energy efficiency group. Note here, this does not include renewable energy evaluation. This is just on the efficiency piece. So this is what efficiency measures would you apply to your building before looking at renewable energy to be able to document you've exhausted what is available for the project site. The performance standards we point to are the ASHA 9.1 2019 prescriptive path, and when the next version of this comes out, we will likely update our small buildings method to that, because we're looking at the most recent version of these next generation codes. And then NBI's got a 40% stretch standard. We've got IGCC construction code and AEDG zero energy ready series. So these are prescriptive paths that are available for projects. And if residential, it's passive house or zero energy ready. There's a couple of I'm not going to go into some details, so I'm trying to catch up. Energy Star requirements and water fixtures, those are prescriptive measures that would also need to be applied. Then for estimating energy use, so you've done this prescriptive path, how much energy can you expect your building to use? You can model it. We have a model tool on our platform that is a streamlined energy model that will give you a number that reflects your building's performance. If you don't want to do that, you can apply a ratio based on what standard you selected to estimate based on your SB 2030 target and your selected standard what your energy use is likely to be, so you can then figure out what renewable energy you need to apply to the project. A couple of different paths here, but note that this second one does not require the project to do energy modeling. And then the performance multipliers, that relationship between the target and the standard, that does vary. And most of these do require everything except the ones in yellow. There will be some renewable energy requirement needed to hit SB 2030. That may be something that needs to be laid out on the project site or needs to be looked at for an offsite option. Okay, we'll go to. Oh yeah, that's the remaining, we're looking at onsite. Additional resources that are available, again, we post all of our trainings, we post all of our tools with the exception of the SB 2030 and Music Guidelines tracking tool. But all of our kind of in the weeds guideline resources, those are all available on our project site at b3.org. And yeah, again, kind of key if not answer any questions. I'm going to hand it off to Jen for a reload project.
Rapid fire. How much time do I have? Ethics credits.
Yeah, you'd really be taking credit for two.
So it's up to you, Rob. I'm here to share the Wakan Tipi Center project, which, as was shared, is a small buildings project through B3. This is also my first B3 project that I've worked on, so it's so nice to be surrounded by people who have worked on B3 projects for years. This project is located in St. Paul. In 2018, it received public bond funding from the state. The budget for this project is a couple different phases, but it's about $8 million budget. It's a 9,500 square foot cultural center that shares the Dakota history, language, and values near the sacred site of the Wakan Tipi cave, which I'll share some of the images of the site in a little bit. The timeline this project has been going on for quite a while, so Pat has known us for some time now, and it continues, so this is a long journey. The owner agency is Lower Phelan Creek Project. The city of St. Paul owns this site. It is on the Bruce Bento Nature Sanctuary. The architects is a partnership between Cunningham and Full Circle Indigenous Planning. So Sam Oldickson is the main designer for this project, and the landscape architect city of St. Paul. The rest of the design team is on the right. This is a large collaborative effort, and we're very proud of the partnership that B3 has really actually supported in this, so we're really excited about that. So what you see here is the site. This work. I think I hit the red button. Okay. So way down here. So this is the Mississippi east of downtown St. Paul. Bruce Bento Nature Sanctuary is here. Wakan Tipi caves are located to the southeast portion of the site, and the image on the top right that you see is a historic image of what the cave looked like. And for the Dakota culture, the Wakan Tipi cave is their origin story. It's a very sacred place for the Dakota culture. And this place has been changed, destroyed, and abandoned over time. And now it's being reclaimed and restored. And so the Bruce Bento Nature Sanctuary was the first part of that restoration, and now this new Wakan Tipi Center up here in the red with views oriented towards the caves is going to be built hopefully within the next year or so. The timeline keeps changing. But here's an enlarged version of the map so that you can see the location. Here's the Wakan Tipi cave. Again, the cave doesn't exist in the way that it used to historically because of the railroad industry that really desecrated all this space, unfortunately. And that's part of the story of restoring and reconnecting to this culture and to this place. You can see this initial design. You can see just how small the building is compared to the site. I think the site is about 5 acres in the property. It is important to know that this is a critical site. So B3, as Pat had mentioned, you can't build on a critical site. However, given the program for this cultural center, it really had to exist here, and so we had to get a variance for it and meet a little bit more strict guidelines for habitat for that as well. We are wedged in between the Kellogg Bridge easement, which is also under construction, sewer easement, and the 100-year flood line. And we have to exist within this space. It is a very tight site with a lot of opportunity. And so this is these are some initial renderings of the space, so you can start to see what it will look like. And I'm going to kind of go a little quickly through this. But the program is an exhibit gallery space with an auditorium space and a sweat lodge and office. It's really going to be a fun place for field trips, meetings, gatherings, and just connecting with the cultural values of the Dakota people. As we dive into B3, soil is a big consideration within B3, and with this site in particular, it is so contaminated from the railroad industry. We have lead, mercury, arsenic, petroleum, PAHs, we have construction fill, brick and coal fines, and they're over time trying to restore this site. However, it really has limited us to not be able to infiltrate the site. So there's some additional kind of constraints with that. Our groundwater is about 4 to 10 feet deep, and it is contaminated. So we can't access groundwater. We cannot infiltrate. We do have an infiltration basin that's planted with native species, which is down here. We have geo-exchange wells to really help us achieve our energy efficiencies. I think those are kind of the main items here, and native plantings. Habitat, this is a critical bird habitat site, and so we do have to meet the more strict bird safe placing requirements for the site. And the rusty patch bumblebee is a protected species on this site. This is a culturally significant place that we will be planting culturally significant plantings. And I think the next slide will show that. But this is, we are really looking to use felled tree materials to support habitat and find ways to really promote the habitat requirements from B3 to really leverage that to align with the cultural values and client values. One of the sort of trickier items for B3 was the water feature requirements. Since we are on a larger site, we had to look at the water feature. And we discovered that there's a trout brook channel that is located close to, and this is like the smallest portion of the site of this trout brook stream. And because of our proximity to that, we don't need to have the water feature. But that was just one thing, like as we were exploring B3, a study we had to make sure we understood what would apply. This is a plan and some images just showing some of the ecosystems and culturally significant plantings within the site plan. And this project, the client really wants to be a client where we leave no trace and we restore and reconnect. And so they have a goal to be net zero. So SB 2030 has an 80% reduction goal with a 2% renewable requirement, and our client has asked us to see if we could be net zero. And that's our charge for this. So we are doing that through, as I mentioned, geo-exchange field, energy recovery, high-performing envelope, R40 walls, R50 roof. Infiltration, I'm not sure how much people have gone into infiltration recently, but this has been an aha moment, again, something supported by B3 with the envelope consulting recommendation. And through working with our envelope consultant, we've really been able to tighten up the envelope, which provides significant energy savings. And that's something that's within our wheelhouse as architects, that we have the power to tighten up our envelopes and see significant energy savings. I want to share that. The solar array system as designed is a 60 kilowatt system. We have our carbon emissions through the calculator that is on the B3 dashboard. It's about 14 pounds of carbon per square foot. Concrete, however, is one of those high embodied carbon materials that we try to avoid. However, given the contamination and instabilities of the soil, we have to use a lot of concrete in this project, unfortunately. We have to have a structural slab, we have to have helical piers. And so to meet not only B3's requirements, but also to do what is the most kind of sustainable thing we can, diving into the concrete specs was a big undertaking for our team. To reduce the embodied carbon as well as the water use for our concrete. We do have carbon cure specified, as well as fly ash and recycled aggregate. Just trying to do all that we can, given the fact that we are going to have to do have a lot of concrete. And then the other kind of revelation for us was about insulation, and this came about through the carbon calculator that you have for small buildings. And XPS has a very high embodied carbon, and so we spoke with our envelope consultant and said, how can we reduce this for our below-grade foundation systems and still maintain the durability, the longevity, the moisture resistance? Are there other options? And through working with him, we were able to confidently swap out XPS for our below-grade foundation insulation with high-density EPS, the key being high density. And that's not something that we as a team would have ever considered as an option. Daylight and views, again, as Pat mentioned, the requirements for regularly occupied spaces to have daylight and views, low emitting materials for healthy interiors, radon mitigation is also very important here on this particular site. Acoustic comfort, our interior partitions extend to deck and meet all the ANSI S1260 requirements, as well as an STC of 55 per liter. I mentioned this has been a long project. This is my last slide. Here's a project update. The project is being redesigned currently to meet the current market costs, inflation, changes that we've all been feeling, as well as the existing site conditions. As we discover more about the site, we're having to adapt more. So this small building is getting smaller. It's now going from 9,500 square feet to 7,200 square feet. And our schedule is being adjusted to accommodate. So we hope to finish up design in March and construction complete in December. Some good news is that the kitchen is now going to be fully electric. So we will have a fully electric building. And that's very exciting for us. And we're trying to just really simplify the geometry and wall systems to just really improve both efficiencies and material use. So I think that this will be a good thing. It's just, hopefully we won't have to redesign it many times. And we will all be able to celebrate in this space in the near future. So that is the Wakan Tipi. And I think we have a few minutes for Q&A discussion.
Thank you so much to our three panelists for those wonderful presentations. So it sounds like the Wakan Tipi Center is using the B3 guidelines, small buildings method.
Yes.
But then maybe you didn't use the SB 2030 small buildings method because of the client goals to be net zero. You're ready to do the energy modeling.
Yes, so we are doing energy modeling.
Yep. And then it wasn't a small site, so those guidelines didn't apply. So that's how that project fits into what Pat was talking about with the guideline requirements. I have a few questions that I've been thinking about for this panel, and then we'll see if anybody from the audience has some as well. My first one, though, is, Jen, it's such a beautiful project, and it feels very closely that the client goals and values are very closely aligned with the V3 program in terms of the native plantings and the leave no trace. Do you, or Amber, do you have any experience or thoughts about working with a client who maybe doesn't have that same value alignment? Start with Jen.
Okay, now I have to use this. Can you guys hear me? I would say, well, first, this is my first V3 project. And so we
we are working on starting another B3 project with a client who doesn't have the same values. And for us, the greatest thing is that B3 is a requirement for their funding, and so we all have to just find ways to come on common ground and to say, it's just like a code, and here are opportunities that it provides, but we do have to create kind of a roadmap of, what does this site have? What are some of the main things that we need to make sure that we're integrating? We do get a lot of pushback from some clients, but I feel like the accountability that B3 provides has actually helped them to realize this isn't just another green building rating system, but it's backed by science and it's a proven process with proven results to support them. That it's not an extra set of hoops they have to go through, that this is really for their benefit as well.
But for so many of those clients who have been pursuing bonding funds or other public funds, it's like been a multi-year effort. So for those clients where you really feel that pinch of, we've worked so hard, legislatively to get this money, we really want to put all of it into program. So really having to talk about what are the priorities and how do we be realistic with our project scope and funds available to meet all of those requirements. Sometimes they're hard conversations, but I haven't run into anybody who says, no, I don't believe in sustainability. So we are all coming from a common objective that, yes, this is a good thing.
So order of our presentation.
Thank you. One thing that I was thinking about as you're presenting, and a little bit in listening to other presentations during this conference, is the role of prescriptive versus performance-based requirements. And I know that the B3 guidelines, SB 2030 standard, has really been trying to go in the direction of be performance-based, give design teams the opportunity to use our creativity and problem-solving skills to figure out the right way to get there for each specific project. But it's feeling like with the small buildings method, maybe responding to a need that we don't always have time for as much of that creativity and exploration as we want. And can you just give us a list of things to do? Pat, can you maybe take the first shot at what's the value of the prescriptive versus performance-based, and then maybe Amber and Jen, I'll ask you to weigh in too on your perspective as designers.
I think that there is, right, ideally it's, you have a wide open opportunity to design your art's intent to really engage in every possible approach to hitting performance metrics, right? Energy efficiency is a good clean example where look at everything under the sun in terms of potential efficiency metrics. But practically, the amount of permutations of evaluation would swallow the design. And so narrowing into, okay, well, here are the things that, based on our modeling, we think are the best opportunities for savings. And if you want to proceed with these, that's great. And most likely represents a achievement of the goals that we're going after. You also have different size design people working on smaller projects. Those might be different size design within larger firms or just as smaller firms working on smaller projects. And we understand that if you don't have somebody who's doing like a whole building LCA model, or if you can't put it to somebody in your national firm that's doing the whole building LCA model, that can be a challenge. And the intent is to find paths, especially for the smaller projects, that again represent equivalent achievement of our goals, but do so in a way that doesn't open up everything kind of blue sky exploration of what can be done. So that is kind of why we landed on these large building approaches are still available for project teams if they have the capacity, if they want to do get close to net zero, or get to net zero with their energy modeling. Again, that's an open pathway. But if you want a basically set of instructions to say, okay, if I do this, and I do this, and I do this, then I can check it off and I can move on.
No, I think that was great. I would say the other thing is just, it's really nice to have those high impact categories, right? Like these are the things you can do to make the greatest impact for your project. And that's what the B3 small buildings has really allowed us to focus on.
Yeah, thank you.
guideline. It's a big interior renovation, but it's no site, no exteriors yet. They weren't going back to the mechanical, they weren't changing the main mechanical system. So they wanted to voluntarily put in a rating system that could accommodate, and they wanted, specifically wanted to be free. Could that accommodate a major renovation project that didn't do a lot of things B3 asked for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is whether B3 can accommodate an interior renovation project that has limited scope outside of that, or perhaps a different rating system might be a better option.
So our platform has, when I say platform, I mean the set of online tools that we built out has the ability to say, okay, we're just going to focus on a section of the guidelines, and that's the functionality we use to say interior renovation and mechanicals. We haven't done many interior renovations that didn't include that mechanical work, but the platform itself would support it. So it's just, yeah, if you want to reach out and discuss what that may look like. We've moved to a model where we apply a review fee to projects that are coming in that are essentially aren't general obligation bond funded, because we've got a fair amount of demand for the program, and so we've got to support our end of things and support our review element. I don't think
The rates are good.
rates are good, but the fee table for that likely isn't very well matched to just the interior renovation, because a large portion of that review fee is our deep dive in terms of the energy use. So please reach out and we can chat about possibilities.
Yeah, certainly a lot of aspects, especially of the indoor environmental quality section of the guidelines, that are really relevant for an interior renovation. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Question about the life cycle of a project, which can go pretty quickly, or depending on the funding source, get paused for a great while. When do you lock into which version? Is there a trigger?
Yeah, the question is, since a lot of these bonded projects, especially, the timelines can be unpredictable or extended, when are we locking into which version of the B3 guidelines, SB 2030 standard, that are required for the project?
There's a little nuance to this. You log into the version of the B3 guidelines that was in effect your pre-design, or you can move forward to a more recent version. So pre-design currently is the start date for your B3 guidelines projects. You lock in what your SB 2030 version at your schematic design start date, because that's your 7%, 80%, 90% reduction. We have a project coming through right now that I believe is in version either 2.1 or 2.2, so that's like a 2012, 2013 versions of B3, because that's what they pre-designed, they designed it, and they put it on the shelf, and then took it off the shelf, and now they're building it. We support that. That meets our rule set. So pre-design for B3, SB 2030 is relating to the schematic design start date. So if you do have a project that's on a shelf that's going to come out and kick off schematic design, you'll need to crank the energy efficiency piece of that up as you do so, unless you made it do further into the design process. I hope that clarifies.
Any other questions out there? I have one final one to close out the session for each of the panelists to answer, which is what to keep in mind when starting a B3 project. What resources should people be aware of? What steps should people be thinking about? Let's just go Jen, Pat.
I would say the first thing is to bring the entire team together in the very beginning and to establish the expectations that this is going to be a B3 project, because some of your consulting teams, they may have a lot of experience in B3 and others might have none. And so I think just getting everybody together first and foremost is your kickoff meeting and give kind of a brief overview of what the expectations are for B3 really helps everybody so that there's not any big surprises. That's my greatest recommendation for B3 or any sort of sustainable or regenerative design that we approach. So
Second, all that, getting specific guidelines at least assigned out to your team can be really useful so that somebody is looking at this against what the project is to say, okay, well, what are the potential approaches for this guideline? What are the potential challenges for this guideline? Are you in a situation where you have incorporated a constraint that might need to apply for a variance? Getting that sort of through early in the design process and reading ahead the guidelines, right? Not just looking at what we need to hit at a certain phase, but what do you need to hit when the construction documents are coming in. That can be really important. In terms of specific guideline areas, just flagging energy because of this stepping towards net zero. So sorting out what you need to bring forward to either hit your 2030 target or set an on-site target. That's probably the number one item to sort out. Bird safety, because not every design team is really used to thinking about bird safety, and specifically the way that we look at threat factors and other bird strike risks. Can be one to flag early. If you have a water feature or other habitat for the project site, again, that may be outside of typical practice and one to note and to consider. Tree conditions, especially movable volume for structural soil, has been flagged by the teams as being something that they needed to modify. We want to make sure that these trees are healthy, not just year 1, but year 5, year 10, year 15, and that's an area that noted the differential. Other piece is things like the material waste diversion rate. 75% reduction of diversion of material waste is something that you kind of need to get ahead of the contractor on to make sure that if you need to do things like on-site sorting to be able to hit that threshold, that you're getting that in the spec and you're making sure that's permanent on the project site so that you document that you have sufficient diversion rates and not just rely on potentially like outside Minnesota, limited material waste stream landscape. So I think those are the highest to flag. But again, get your guidelines assigned out and read ahead to what we're going to need to see by the end of the design process.
So I don't know how many things are left on my list. Those were great. So assign roles, and then require that your team members read that guideline all the way through every phase. I know I'm repeating what you said, but I think it's so important that it actually bears repeating because you don't want to find something in construction documents that you could have easily addressed at pre-design and incorporated at that time and having to backtrack. Man, that's super frustrating. And I've been there, it's happened, things slip through the cracks. So you're not alone if you've run into that experience on a B3 project, but get all of those guidelines assigned out to a role and then really empower all of your team members to say, you are the champion of this for this project, for our owner. And really start to build that as a team of champions rather than thinking about this as an obligation. If you can bring that attitude as a team leader, it's going to be a great starting point. Again, restating what Pat said, think about how you want to integrate B3 into your specifications and where you integrate it into your specifications. Is it in the front end? Is it in all of your technical sections? Is it in both? Think about what's going to work best for you and your projects. And lastly, here's a really silly one, but all of the B3 guidelines, including the small buildings method, you can download them as a PDF, which is searchable. So when you come up against a question on a certain topic, you can search that PDF and you can find all the hits within the guidelines. I've been doing this for a long time, and there are still things that I'm looking up regularly. Like, wait a second, how does that come into play, especially with the small building method, which is newer. So it makes it a little quick and easy for you to look smart on a phone call to search something out and say, yes, let me tell you the exact language along the way. So,
Very nice.
And one other recommendation is if you have, it's been really useful, and I think a good piece of the process of moving through B3. If you get your team together, get the guidelines assigned out, read them ahead, make sure you've got an understanding about what we're asking for throughout the design process, and then we can field questions about what the design has. The project teams, I will hop on an hour every 6 weeks with the team to answer the full team's questions about what we're asking for. That's been a really useful piece of the process, and we are available to provide that assistance.
Yeah, that's a great resource. All right, that concludes our panel session. Let's thank our wonderful panelists.